Section 1. A frozen conflict. The Middle East, before 1973. The 1973 October War, also known as the Yom Kippur War, reshaped the political landscape of the Middle East. Before the war, the region was mired in a seemingly intractable conflict. The 1967 Six-Day War had left Israel in control of the Sinai Peninsula, the Golan Heights, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. Arab states, reeling from the humiliating defeat, sought to regain lost territories and restore their pride. Diplomatic efforts to resolve the Arab-Israeli conflict had reached an impasse. The superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, were locked in a Cold War rivalry that further complicated the situation. The 1973 war would prove to be that spark, but it would also set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately lead to a fragile peace. Section 2. The Calculus of War, Egypt's Bold Gamble. By 1973, Egypt, under President Anwar Sadat, had grown increasingly impatient with the status quo. Sadat recognized that the military balance of power had shifted slightly in favor of the Arab states. He aimed to achieve a limited military objective, to break the stalemate in the Sinai Peninsula and create leverage for future negotiations. Sadat's plan was audacious, relying on both military surprise and diplomatic finesse. He coordinated closely with Syria to launch a coordinated attack on Israeli forces on two fronts, the Sinai Peninsula and the Golan Heights. On October 6, 1973, as Israelis observed Yom Kippur, Egyptian and Syrian forces launched their surprise attack. The war had begun, and with it, Sadat had dramatically altered the dynamics of the Arab-Israeli conflict. Section 3. Breaking the stalemate, the October surprise. The initial Egyptian assault across the Suez Canal caught Israel completely off guard. Egyptian forces, equipped with Soviet-made anti-tank missiles and operating under the cover of a sophisticated air defense system, made rapid gains into the Sinai Peninsula. The early days of the war were marked by fierce fighting and heavy casualties on both sides. Israel, initially stunned by the surprise attack, quickly mobilized its reserves and launched a counter-offensive. The war was a brutal and costly affair, with both sides suffering significant losses. The conflict drew in the superpowers, with the United States airlifting supplies to Israel and the Soviet Union providing support to Egypt and Syria. Section 4. The Limits of Victory Stalemate on the Battlefield. Despite the initial successes of the Egyptian and Syrian armies, the tide of the war gradually turned in Israel's favor. The Israel Defense Forces, IDF, recovered from their initial setbacks and launched a series of successful counterattacks. In the Sinai, Israeli forces crossed the Suez Canal, encircling a portion of the Egyptian Third Army. In the Golan Heights, Israeli troops repelled the Syrian advance and pushed back towards Damascus. By the time a UN-brokered ceasefire came into effect on October 25, 1973, both sides found themselves in a military stalemate. The war had exacted a heavy toll on all involved. Section 5. The Diplomatic Battlefield, from War to Negotiation. The 1973 war marked a turning point in the Arab-Israeli conflict, not so much because of the military outcome, but because of its profound political consequences. Anwar Sadat, having demonstrated Egypt's military capabilities and shaken Israel's sense of invincibility, emerged as a pivotal figure in the region. He recognized that the war had created a unique opportunity to break the diplomatic deadlock and pursue a negotiated settlement with Israel. Sadat's willingness to engage with Israel, once unthinkable in the Arab world, was a bold and controversial move. The United States, under Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, played a key role in mediating between Egypt and Israel. Kissinger's shuttle diplomacy laid the groundwork for a series of disengagement agreements and, ultimately, for the historic peace treaty between Egypt and Israel. Section 6. The Architect of Change, Anwar Sadat's Vision. Anwar Sadat's decision to pursue peace with Israel was a calculated risk, driven by pragmatism and strategic vision. Sadat understood that the Arab world could not afford endless war with Israel. He recognized that Egypt's economic and social development had been hampered by the constant state of conflict with Israel. Sadat's vision for peace was based on the principle of land for peace. He was willing to recognize Israel's right to exist within secure borders, in exchange for the return of the Sinai Peninsula. His bold move paved the way for a new chapter in Arab-Israeli relations, one marked by dialogue and negotiation instead of war and hostility. Section 7. Land for Peace, the Sinai Disengagement Agreements. The first concrete step towards peace came in January 1974, just a few months after the war, with the signing of the Sinai Disengagement Agreements. These agreements, brokered by the United States, provided for the disengagement of Israeli and Egyptian forces along the Suez Canal. The agreements also established a UN buffer zone in the Sinai Peninsula, separating the two armies and reducing the risk of further clashes. The Sinai Disengagement Agreements were a significant achievement, marking the first time that Israel had agreed to withdraw from territory captured in the 1967 war. The agreements were followed by further negotiations, culminating in the signing of the Second Sinai Disengagement Agreement in September 1975. The Sinai Disengagement Agreements were a testament to the power of diplomacy and the willingness of both sides to make difficult compromises in the pursuit of peace. A new reality: the shifting sands of Middle Eastern power. The 1973 war and its aftermath had a profound impact on the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East. The war shattered the myth of Israeli military invincibility, emboldened Arab states, and paved the way for a more assertive Egyptian role in regional affairs. Egypt's willingness to negotiate directly with Israel, once unthinkable, signaled a significant shift in the Arab world's approach to the conflict. The war also highlighted the limits of Soviet influence in the region. The United States, on the other hand, emerged from the war as the dominant external power in the region. The war also had significant implications for the global balance of power. Beyond the battlefield, the war's enduring legacy. The 1973 October War, though militarily inconclusive, had a profound and enduring impact on the Middle East. The war's most significant outcome was the peace treaty between Egypt and Israel, a landmark achievement that transformed the dynamics of the Arab-Israeli conflict. The treaty, signed in 1979, formally ended decades of hostility between the two countries. The treaty also provided for the full return of the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt, a key Egyptian demand. The peace treaty between Egypt and Israel was a watershed moment in the history of the Middle East, demonstrating that peace between Arabs and Israelis was possible. However, the treaty did not resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which continues to cast a long shadow over the region. The price of peace: challenges and opportunities. The peace treaty between Egypt and Israel, while a historic achievement, came at a price. Egypt's decision to pursue peace with Israel, while strategically sound, alienated it from some segments of the Arab world. Egypt was suspended from the Arab League, and its leadership was criticized by some for abandoning the Palestinian cause. However, the treaty also brought significant benefits to Egypt. It allowed Egypt to reorient its foreign policy away from the Arab-Israeli conflict and focus on its domestic development. The treaty also paved the way for billions of dollars in U.S. aid to Egypt, which helped to bolster its economy and modernize its military. The peace treaty also presented both challenges and opportunities for Israel. Conclusion: a legacy of hope and uncertainty. The 1973 October War was a watershed moment in the history of the Middle East. The war had a profound impact on the region, shattering old certainties and creating new realities. The war's most enduring legacy is the peace treaty between Egypt and Israel, a testament to the power of diplomacy and the courage of leaders willing to take risks for peace. However, the Arab-Israeli conflict, of which the 1973 war was a part, remains unresolved. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict in particular continues to be a source of instability and violence in the region. The 1973 war reminds us that even in the midst of conflict, hope for peace should never be extinguished.